My name is Audrey, I'm 32, and yesterday I finally cut the ribbon on Sweet Foundations Bakery, my dream since I was 8 years old. After culinary school, years of working for demanding chefs, and emptying my savings account, I finally have my own place. I spent weeks personally inviting my family to the grand opening, hoping they'd finally see my passion as more than just a phase. If you're watching this from your own kitchen, hit that subscribe button and stick around. I'm about to share how my perfect day turned into the most bittersweet lesson of my life. Growing up in Maplewood, a small town where everyone knows your business before you do, I spent most weekends in my grandmother Hazel's kitchen. Her house always smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, and she had this ancient floral apron that I would trip over while wearing. My earliest memories are standing on a wooden stool beside her, watching magic happen as she transformed simple ingredients into works of art that made people smile. My mother Eleanor was always supportive in her quiet way. She'd display my lopsided cookies on the good china when visitors came, bragging about her little baker. My father Richard, however, saw baking as a nice hobby, nothing more. Audrey needs something stable, he'd say right in front of me. Kitchens don't make money unless you own the restaurant. Meanwhile, my brother Brian could announce any business venture, from pressure washing to website design, and Dad would immediately offer startup funds and connections. I still remember my first independent baking attempt at 8 years old. I wanted to surprise everyone with chocolate chip cookies, but confused baking soda with baking powder. The resulting flat, bitter discs were nearly inedible, but my family dutifully crunched through them with exaggerated mmm. Even Brian, normally quick with a teasing comment, just ruffled my hair and said they were creative. Throughout high school, I worked at Millie's Bake Shop downtown after classes and on weekends. Millie Watson was a tough boss but saw something in me. "You've got the touch, girl," she'd say when my pastries came out perfect. "Some people bake with their hands. You bake with your heart." When I told my parents I wanted to apply to culinary school, Dad immediately shut it down. "You're going to get a business degree first. Then if you still want to play with flour, you can do it with actual knowledge." So I compromised. 4 years of business school at the State University, where I excelled but felt nothing. I followed the expected path to a corporate marketing job with benefits and a retirement plan. For 3 years, I sat in a gray cubicle creating campaigns for products I didn't care about. The money was good, Dad was so proud, but I came home every night feeling hollow. Everything changed when Grandma Hazel passed away. At the reading of her will, I received her handwritten recipe book and an envelope. Inside was a note. "Audrey, some dreams can't wait forever. This should help with yours." Along with it was a check for $25,000, her life savings. I cried for days, both from loss and from the weight of her belief in me. 2 weeks later, I quit my corporate job. Dad didn't speak to me for a month. Mom called daily with worried questions. Brian laughed and said I'd be back in the corporate world by Christmas. Only my best friend Stephanie celebrated with me, bringing champagne the day I submitted my application to the Culinary Institute. Culinary school was brutal and beautiful. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who understood the alchemy of baking, the science and art of it. I specialized in pastry, staying after hours to perfect laminated doughs and delicate sugar work. My instructors noticed. Chef Marcus even pulled me aside after graduation. "Whatever kitchen gets you will be lucky," he said. "But you should aim higher than working for someone else." I took his advice to heart but knew I needed more practical experience. Over the next 5 years, I worked at 3 different bakeries, absorbing everything I could. At Rosemont Bakery, I learned classic French techniques from Chef Pierre, who would throw entire batches in the trash if they weren't perfect. "Mediocrity is a disease, Audrey," he would say with his thick accent. "Never serve what you wouldn't eat yourself." At Sweetness, a trendy downtown spot, I learned about business operations from Natalie, who had grown her cupcake business into a mini empire. She taught me about pricing, inventory management, and marketing, all the practical aspects my business degree hadn't covered in relation to actual baking. My final job was at the Daily Bread, a community-focused bakery where owner Thomas emphasized relationships over profits. Regular customers become family, he said. And family keeps you in business during hard times. He showed me how to remember not just customer preferences but their stories. When Mr. Henderson's wife passed away, Thomas baked her favorite cinnamon rolls for the funeral. The Henderson family has ordered all their celebration cakes from him ever since. With experience under my belt, I spent 6 months developing my business plan. Nights and weekends were dedicated to spreadsheets, projections, and menu planning. I researched locations, equipment costs, and supplier options. When it was finished, I nervously shared it with my family over Sunday dinner. Dad flipped through it silently, his face unreadable. Brian immediately pointed out flaws in my market analysis. Mom just kept refilling everyone's drinks, a nervous habit when tension filled the room. It's a solid plan, Dad finally said, handing it back. But risky. The economy's unpredictable. I'll loan you startup cash if you make me a partner, Brian offered. 40-60 split. I thanked them but declined. This had to be mine, completely mine, even if it meant more struggle. The next week, I began applying for small business loans. Finding the perfect location took months. I wanted character, visibility, and affordability, an almost impossible combination. When I finally walked into the vacant corner space on Maple and Fifth, with its big windows and vintage tin ceiling, I knew immediately. The building had history. It had been a hardware store in the 1950s, then a bookshop, and most recently a boutique that had moved to a larger location. Something about the worn wooden floors and natural light made it feel like home. The day I signed the lease was terrifying and exhilarating. Standing alone in the empty space, I could already see it filled with display cases and small tables, the walls painted a warm cream, the air scented with sugar and spice. For the first time, Sweet Foundation's bakery felt real. I took a photo and sent it to Grandma Hazel's old phone number, a habit I couldn't break. I did it, Grandma. This one's for you. The lease was signed, but that was just the beginning of the battle. With business plan in hand, I approached 6 different banks for a loan. The first 5 rejected me outright. Your projections seem optimistic, one banker said, not looking up from his computer. The restaurant industry has a high failure rate, another explained condescendingly, as if I hadn't included that factor in my risk assessment. The 6th bank, Maplewood Community Credit Union, was my last hope. The loan officer, Patricia, actually read my entire business plan. She asked thoughtful questions about my experience and vision. A week later, she called with approval for a $75,000 small business loan. I believe in what you're doing, she said. My daughter follows your baking Instagram. Those passion fruit macarons looked amazing. With funding secured, renovation began, and so did the nightmares. What looked like a simple cosmetic update revealed structural issues once we removed the outdated wallpaper. Water damage had weakened one wall, requiring complete replacement. The ancient plumbing gurgled ominously before giving up entirely during the first bathroom update. Add another $15,000 to your budget, the contractor advised casually, as if I had an endless supply of cash. I had to make hard choices, delay the opening or do some of the work myself. I chose the latter. Every night after overseeing contractors during the day, I would paint until midnight. My original vision of hiring professionals for a perfect finish gave way to YouTube tutorials on how to paint like a pro. Stephanie would join me when she could, both of us in paint-splattered clothes, taking silly photos for before and after comparisons. This is going to be so beautiful, she said one night as we painted the final wall. I'm so proud of you, Audrey. When my brother Brian stopped by unannounced during renovations, his first words were, "The color's a bit feminine, isn't it? And that ceiling needs work." No hello, no offer to help. Just criticism delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Equipment purchases were another exercise in compromise. The professional mixer I coveted cost nearly $5,000. I found a used one for $2,200 with a questionable motor noise that the seller swore was totally normal. The refrigerated display case came from a bakery that had gone out of business, a fact my father pointed out was statistically relevant. Each night, I'd return to my apartment and develop recipes, my signature items that would set Sweet Foundations apart. I wanted to honor tradition while adding unexpected elements. Grandma Hazel's cinnamon rolls but with a brown butter glaze. Classic chocolate chip cookies with browned butter and sea salt. Vanilla cupcakes with lavender honey frosting. Each recipe was tested multiple times, with detailed notes on temperature, timing, and technique. Hiring staff proved another challenge. My budget allowed for 2 part-time employees to start. After interviewing 15 candidates, I found my team. Casey was a culinary student with blue-tipped hair and endless enthusiasm. At 22, she reminded me of myself, eager to learn everything and unafraid of early mornings. Deborah, a recently retired elementary school teacher with a passion for baking, brought warmth and meticulous attention to detail. When she mentioned that she'd been bringing homemade bread to faculty meetings for 30 years, I hired her on the spot. 2 weeks before opening, the health inspector showed up for the initial review. He found 7 violations requiring immediate attention. The hand sink needed to be relocated. The floor near the ovens had small cracks that could harbor bacteria. The lighting wasn't bright enough in the prep area. Each fix ate into my dwindling contingency fund. The first delivery from my primary supplier arrived with half the order missing and substitutions I hadn't approved. When I called to complain, they blamed a new ordering system and promised to correct it next time. There wouldn't be a next time if I couldn't open on schedule. This is why you should have gone with Brian's supplier contact, my mother said when I mentioned the problem during our weekly call. He knows people who are reliable. I know people too, Mom, I replied, trying to keep frustration from my voice. I've been in this industry for years. Of course you have, sweetie. I'm just saying Brian is good at negotiating these things. Every family conversation somehow circled back to how Brian could do it better. When Dad asked about my financial cushion and I mentioned having 3 months of operating expenses saved, he shook his head. Should be 6 minimum. That's basic business. Brian offered unsolicited advice at every turn. Your logo doesn't pop enough. My friend Derek does graphic design, he could fix it for a family discount. Or, your hours should start earlier. Commuters want coffee and pastries by 6 a.m. Never mind that my business plan specifically targeted the mid-morning to afternoon crowd, with specialized items that required fresh baking throughout the day. As opening day approached, financial stress mounted. The renovation overruns had eaten through most of my contingency fund. I'd need strong sales from day one to stay afloat. At night, lying awake, doubts would creep in despite my outward confidence. What if no one came? What if they came but didn't return? What if my family was right, and this was all an expensive mistake? The day before opening, my father called. Just checking you're still on for tomorrow. Your mother is quite excited. Yes, Dad. We open at 10 a.m. Everything's ready. A pause. Good luck, then. I'm sure it will be nice. That hesitation before nice spoke volumes. He was expecting failure. Maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. I hung up and looked around my nearly finished bakery, with its gleaming counters and warm colors. They'll see, I whispered to myself. They'll finally see. Sleep was impossible the night before opening. I tossed and turned, mentally reviewing my prep list and imagining worst-case scenarios. What if the oven malfunctioned? What if I slept through my alarm? What if no one showed up except my disapproving family? My alarm blared at 3:30 a.m., though I was already awake. After a quick shower, I dressed in my new chef's coat with Sweet Foundations Bakery and my name embroidered over the heart, a splurge I'd allowed myself despite the budget constraints. The bakery was dark and quiet when I arrived at 4 a.m., the street empty except for the occasional early delivery truck. Unlocking the door felt momentous, the first of what would hopefully be thousands of mornings in my own space. I flipped on the lights, turned on the ovens to preheat, and breathed in the potential of the day ahead. My morning prep list was extensive. The signature cinnamon rolls needed to rise twice before baking. Cookie doughs needed to be portioned and baked fresh. Cupcake batters needed to be mixed and baked, then cooled completely before frosting. I moved methodically through each task, the familiar rhythms calming my nerves. Casey arrived at 5:30 a.m., impossibly perky for the early hour. "This is really happening," she squealed, tying her apron. "It smells amazing already. What can I do first?" I assigned her to cupcake duty while I focused on the more technical pastries. By 6:15, Deborah joined us, immediately noticing details I'd missed in my nervous state. "The napkin holders need filling, and we should wipe down the menu boards one more time," she said, hanging up her coat. "Oh, and I brought extra pens for the register, just in case." The first batch of cinnamon rolls emerged from the oven at 7:30, golden brown spirals with the perfect amount of gooey center. The brown butter glaze went on while they were still warm, creating a shiny, inviting finish. Next came croissants, their layered dough creating perfect honeycombs of buttery pockets. Cookies followed, chocolate chip, snickerdoodle, and my special lemon white chocolate with fresh thyme. As we worked, I described each item to Casey and Deborah, sharing not just techniques but stories. "These shortbread cookies use my grandmother's recipe. The trick is keeping the dough cold until the very last minute," I explained while cutting perfect rounds. "And these lavender cupcakes were inspired by a trip to a farmer's market where I smelled honey and lavender soap at neighboring stalls." At 8:45, I was piping honey lavender frosting onto vanilla cupcakes when I smelled something burning. In my focus on the delicate piping work, I'd forgotten about the last batch of chocolate cookies in the oven. No. I rushed to salvage them, but it was too late. 12 perfectly round hockey pucks emerged, smoking slightly. Casey tried to hide her smile. "Well, now we have a comparison to show what not to do," I laughed, trying to ease my own tension. "Let's quickly make another batch." While Casey handled the cookie rescue mission, I arranged the display cases. Each item needed to look inviting but not overcrowded. The cinnamon rolls took center stage, with croissants and morning buns flanking them. Cookies were arranged by color and texture for visual appeal. Cupcakes formed a rainbow of frosted perfection in the refrigerated case. At 9:30, the delivery from Bloom Fresh Flowers arrived, a splurge from Stephanie who couldn't be there for opening morning due to work. "For your sweet beginning," the card read. "So proud of you." The arrangements of sunflowers and daisies in vintage mason jars added perfect touches of color to the counter and tables. The welcome table by the door held stacks of business cards, loyalty punch cards offering a free pastry after 10 purchases, and a guest book for opening day visitors to sign. The grand opening banner hung across the front windows, visible from half a block away. I'd splurged on professional signage, no homemade banners for this milestone. At 9:45, I gathered Casey and Deborah for a final pep talk. "No matter what happens today, I'm grateful to have you both here," I said, my voice catching slightly. "Let's make this a day to remember." I checked the reservations list one more time. All my family members had confirmed, Mom and Dad, Brian and his wife Michelle, even my Aunt Judith from across town. Their names were highlighted in yellow on the guest list, a visual reminder of what was at stake emotionally. At 9:55, I stepped into the kitchen for a moment alone. On a small shelf above the prep table, I'd placed a framed photo of Grandma Hazel in her kitchen, flour dusting her cheeks as she smiled at the camera. "Wish you were here," I whispered. "But I think you'd be proud." My phone buzzed with a text from Mom, "On our way. Your father's in a bit of a mood, traffic was bad. But we'll be there soon." So excited. My stomach tightened. Dad in a mood usually meant criticism wrapped in concern. I took a deep breath and reminded myself this day wasn't about winning his approval. It was about my dream, my vision, my work. "Everything okay?" Casey asked, poking her head into the kitchen. "Just a moment of panic," I admitted. What if nobody comes? What if everybody hates everything? Casey, despite being a decade younger, fixed me with a surprisingly authoritative look. Look at what you've already done, Audrey. This place is gorgeous, the food is amazing, and you're the boss now. Even if today is somehow a disaster, which it won't be, you've already succeeded by getting here. She gestured around the kitchen. Now come on, we've got customers waiting. Sure enough, a small line had formed outside the door. I hadn't even noticed. With one final deep breath, I walked to the front of my bakery, ready to welcome the world to Sweet Foundations. At exactly 10 a.m., I unlocked the door to Sweet Foundations Bakery. The small bell I'd installed tinkled as the first customers entered. A young couple pushing a stroller, followed by an older gentleman in a newsboy cap, then a group of women who looked like they'd just finished a morning workout. Welcome to Sweet Foundations. I greeted them, trying to keep my voice steady despite my racing heart. Everything's fresh baked this morning. Let me know if you have any questions. The first hour passed in a blur of transactions, recommendations, and the satisfying ring of the cash register. Each sale felt like validation. People were willing to spend their money on my creations. The cinnamon rolls were the clear favorite, with several customers buying extras for later after sampling their first bite. Mrs. Abernathy, who'd been a regular at every bakery I'd worked in town, clutched my hand over the counter. Darling, this place is exactly what Maplewood needed. I'll be here every Tuesday and Friday, you can count on it. By 11:30, we'd had a steady stream of curious locals and supportive community members. The guest book was filling with warm wishes and compliments. Casey handled the register with charm and efficiency while Deborah kept the display cases tidy and offered samples. I alternated between helping customers and rushing back to the kitchen to replenish items as they sold out. I kept checking the time, acutely aware that my family still hadn't arrived. At 11:45, the bell tinkled and my mother walked in, wearing her Sunday best and looking around with wide eyes. Audrey, she exclaimed, rushing over to hug me. This is wonderful. It's so bright and welcoming, and so many customers already. For the first time that day, I felt tears threatening. Her genuine excitement meant more than I'd expected. Thanks, Mom. Want to try a cinnamon roll? They're Grandma's recipe with my special glaze. She insisted on paying despite my protests, then took a seat by the window, waving at everyone who passed by and proudly telling customers, my daughter owns this place. 20 minutes later, Brian arrived with his wife Michelle. He wore a business casual outfit as if stopping by during a workday, though I knew his office was closed on Saturdays. Nice turnout, he said, scanning the busy shop. Good location choice, I'll give you that. It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd offered since I'd announced my plans. Michelle air-kissed my cheek. Everything looks adorable, Audrey. So quaint and homey. Something in her tone made quaint sound like a consolation prize rather than a compliment, but I smiled anyway. Try something, I offered. The lemon shortbread is really special. Brian selected a chocolate croissant, immediately comparing it to ones he'd had in actual Paris. As he ate, he scanned the space with a businessman's eye. Your pricing is on the high side for Maplewood, he noted, though I'd carefully researched competitive pricing. And you might want to reconsider your layout. The flow is awkward when there's a line. The layout maximizes our limited space, I explained. We tested different configurations before. Just offering some constructive feedback, he interrupted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's what family's for, right? Before I could respond, the bell tinkled again as Marjorie Wells from the Maplewood Weekly entered. I'd invited her for the scheduled interview about new local businesses. Audrey. This place looks amazing, she said, pulling out her notepad. Mind if I ask you a few questions for the feature? Maybe take some photos of you with your creations? I led her to a quieter corner table, but Brian followed, pulling up a chair uninvited. I can give some context about the family business angle, he offered smoothly. Audrey's following in the entrepreneurial family footsteps. Marjorie looked confused. Oh, Does your family own other bakeries? No, I started to explain, but Brian jumped in. I run Bennett Digital Solutions. Different industry, same principles. I've been mentoring Audrey through this startup phase. My cheeks burned as I met Marjorie's eyes. Brian's my brother, but Sweet Foundations is my independent venture. I developed the business plan using my background in both business and professional baking. Throughout the interview, Brian interjected clarifications to my answers. When I explained my vision for creating a community gathering space, he added, "What Audrey means is that customer retention is key in food service, so creating loyalty through atmosphere is strategic." After the third interruption, Marjorie started directing her questions specifically to me with a sympathetic glance. When she asked about future plans, Brian answered before I could open my mouth. Expansion is definitely on the horizon. We're thinking multiple locations within 5 years, right, AUD? Actually, I said firmly, I'm focusing on making this location successful and sustainable before considering any expansion. Marjorie seemed to sense the tension, wrapping up the interview quickly. As she took final photos of the bakery interior, I checked my watch again. 12:45 p.m. Dad was nearly 3 hours late. My phone buzzed with a text, "Running late. Client emergency call. Be there when I can. Dad." No apology, no explanation of how much longer he'd be. Just a statement of fact. I showed the message to Mom, who sighed. "You know your father. Work always comes first." "It's my grand opening," I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "The biggest day of my career. And it's going wonderfully," Mom said brightly, changing the subject. "Oh, you need to refill the cinnamon rolls. They're almost gone." She was right. The signature items section of the display case was nearly empty. I rushed to the kitchen to prepare more, grateful for the excuse to escape family dynamics for a moment. As I worked, I overheard Brian and Michelle talking in low voices just outside the kitchen door, unaware I could hear them. "It's cute that she's trying this," Michelle was saying. "But realistically, how long do you give it? The location rent alone must be killing her." 6 months, maybe a year, Brian replied. "Dad thinks she'll burn through her savings by Christmas. The margins in baking are terrible unless you're doing high-volume wholesale." "At least she's got the corporate experience to fall back on," Michelle added. "Though I can't imagine returning to entry-level after playing business owner." I froze, rolling pen in hand, their words hitting like physical blows. This was what they really thought. Not just doubts about my business, but a countdown to failure they were apparently discussing regularly. Forcing myself back to work, I aggressively rolled dough while blinking back tears. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me falter. When I returned to the front with fresh cinnamon rolls, I noticed Rebecca Stone had entered, owner of Maplewood's other bakery, Sweet Nothings. Her shop specialized in custom cakes and had been in business for 15 years. I'd intentionally developed a different menu to avoid direct competition. "Quite the opening day," she said, looking around at the busy shop. "Congratulations." "Thank you for coming," I replied cautiously. Rebecca and I had a cordial professional relationship, but I wasn't naive about her visit. She examined the display case carefully. "Interesting selection. Similar to what Millbrook Bakery is doing in Fairfield. They're quite successful with the artisanal approach." The unspoken for now hung in the air. As she purchased a single lavender cupcake for research, I maintained my professional smile while stress knotted my shoulders. The message was clear: she was watching, evaluating, planning her competitive response. By 1:30 p.m., we'd had a brief lull that allowed me to restock and take a quick break. The tension of maintaining a cheerful facade while managing family dynamics was exhausting. In the back office, I checked sales figures quickly. We were actually exceeding my projections for opening day. If only Dad were here to see these numbers. As if summoned by my thoughts, the bell tinkled again. Dad walked in, looking around with a critical eye that immediately found flaws rather than achievements. Dad stood in the doorway scanning the bakery, his expression shifting from critical assessment to reluctant recognition that the place was actually busy. He wore his standard Saturday business casual, pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, as if he might be called into an impromptu meeting at any moment. "There you are," Mom called, waving him over to the family corner where she, Brian, and Michelle had settled. "Isn't it wonderful?" I approached to greet him, wiping flour-covered hands on my apron. "Hi, Dad. Glad you could make it." "Client emergency," he explained without elaboration or apology. "Place looks busy." Coming from Dad, this was as close to praise as I could expect. I offered to show him around, but Brian jumped in. "Already gave him the tour via FaceTime while you were in the kitchen. More efficient that way." Of course he had. I took a deep breath. "Would you like to try something? The cinnamon rolls are Grandma Hazel's recipe." Dad nodded, following me to the counter where Casey was handling a small line of customers. When it was our turn, I selected the perfect cinnamon roll and placed it on a plate with our logo. "On the house," I said, handing it to him. "I'll pay," he insisted, pulling out his wallet. "No special treatment." "Dad, I own the place. I can give my father a free pastry." Bad business practice to give away product. Sets a precedent. Rather than argue, I rang him up for the full price. As he took a bite, I watched anxiously for his reaction. "It's good," he said finally. "Sweet, though." "It's a cinnamon roll, Richard," Mom chided. "It's supposed to be sweet." With the morning rush tapering off, I could finally take a brief break. I asked Casey to watch the front while I invited my family to the small office in the back for coffee and a moment of celebration. Mom brought a small gift bag. "Just a little something for your opening day." Inside was a framed photo of Grandma Hazel and me baking together when I was about 10 years old. It was perfect, and for a moment, the day felt like it was getting back on track. Then Dad cleared his throat. "So, about your first quarter projections." Brian jumped in. "I was telling Dad about the pricing structure. I think you're about 15% above what the local market will consistently bear." "I've done extensive market research," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "My prices reflect the quality of ingredients and the artisanal nature of." "It's a cute hobby business," Dad interrupted. "But let's be realistic about sustainability. The small business failure rate." "This isn't a hobby," I said, my voice sharper than intended. "This is my career. My passion. And it's a real business with a solid plan." Dad raised his eyebrows. "No need to get emotional. I'm just offering professional perspective. Your perspective assumes I'm going to fail before I've been open a full day." "Not fail," Brian interjected with a patronizing smile. "Just need some guidance." "Look, I've been talking to some people who could help streamline your operation. Make it more efficient." "What people?" I asked, suspicion rising. "Just business contacts. Restaurant supply companies, marketing specialists who owe me favors. I could probably negotiate better rates for you. I have my own contacts. I've been in this industry for years." Dad sighed. "Audrey, there's no shame in accepting help from people with more experience." "More experience in what?" "Neither of you has ever run a bakery. Neither of you has ever even worked in food service." "Business is business," Brian shrugged. "The principles are universal." I could feel my composure slipping. "If business is just business, why didn't you offer this level of help when I was in corporate marketing? Why is it only my bakery that needs your expertise?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the small office. Michelle suddenly became very interested in her cupcake, while Mom looked anxiously between us. "Because this is riskier," Dad finally said. "And frankly, less prestigious. I'm not ashamed to admit I'd rather tell colleagues my daughter is a marketing executive than a baker." The words hit like a slap. "Less prestigious?" I repeated incredulously. "He doesn't mean it like that," Mom interjected quickly. "It's just." I know exactly what he means, I said, my voice shaking. He's embarrassed by my career choice. He always has been. Not embarrassed, Dad corrected. Concerned. This isn't the stable career path your education prepared you for. I'm using my business degree every day. I'm just applying it to something I'm passionate about instead of products I don't care about. Brian scoffed. Passion doesn't pay the rent. Actually, I countered, passion is exactly what's paying the rent. My passion created recipes that people lined up for this morning. My passion built a brand that's already exceeding first-day projections. First-day novelty, Brian dismissed. Let's see where you are in 6 months. Something in his tone triggered a realization. You're counting on me to fail, aren't you? You're actually waiting for it. Brian had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Dad jumped to his defense. We're being realistic. Most restaurants don't last a year. This isn't just a restaurant, it's... In fact, Brian interrupted, avoiding my eyes, I actually mentioned to your landlord that if things don't work out, I might be interested in the space. For a satellite office, he added quickly. Just keeping options open. I stared at him in shock. You talked to my landlord about taking over my space? Before I've even had a chance to succeed or fail on my own? It was just a casual conversation, he backpedaled. There's nothing casual about undermining my business before it even opens. My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. What else have you done? Who else have you been talking to about my inevitable failure? The guilty glance between Brian and Dad told me everything. Unbelievable, I said, standing up. What was it? Suppliers? Potential customers? I may have mentioned to a few restaurant supply contacts that your operation might be temporary, Brian admitted. Just so they wouldn't be caught off guard if... If what? If I crashed and burned like you're apparently hoping for? Anger and hurt fought for dominance as I looked between my father and brother. Neither of you has ever believed in me, have you? Not really. That's not fair, Dad said stiffly. We've always supported. No. You've tolerated. There's a difference. I took a deep breath, trying to regain composure. I need to get back to work. My customers are waiting. I headed for the door, but Mom caught my arm. Audrey, they're just trying to help in their way. Maybe they have some valid points you could consider? The final betrayal. Even Mom, who I thought was genuinely proud, was siding with them. I'm not having this conversation right now, I said, pulling away. I have a business to run. I returned to the front, fighting to maintain my professional demeanor as tears threatened. A line had formed at the register, and Casey was looking overwhelmed. Sorry for the wait, I said to the elderly woman at the front of the line, my voice unsteady. What can I get for you today? Are you all right, dear? She asked instead of ordering. You look upset. The simple kindness from a stranger broke the dam. A tear escaped before I could stop it. I wiped it away quickly, but more followed. I'm sorry, I whispered, stepping back from the counter. Excuse me for just a moment. I retreated to the kitchen, where I could break down in private. Finding the large walk-in refrigerator, I stepped inside where the hum of the motor would cover my sobs. Leaning against the cold metal shelving, I finally let go of the tight control I'd maintained all day. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed, and my own family was betting against me. Worse, they were actively undermining me while pretending to offer support. The betrayal cut deep, reopening childhood wounds of never being taken seriously. Through the refrigerator door, I heard Casey call my name tentatively. Audrey? We need help up front when you're ready. I needed to pull myself together. Customers were waiting. But in that moment, hunched among butter boxes and cream cartons, I hit rock bottom. What if they were right? What if this was all a terrible mistake? My gaze fell on Grandma Hazel's recipe book, which I kept on a shelf in the kitchen. I'd placed it there as a good luck charm, a connection to where my love of baking began. Without thinking, I pulled it from the shelf and held it to my chest like a shield. The book fell open to a page with a handwritten note tucked inside, one I'd never noticed before. In Grandma's familiar shaky handwriting, it read, "To my Audrey. Remember, the sweetest foundations aren't built on others' approval, but on your own courage to create something true. I'm always proudest when you trust your own recipe. Love, Grandma H." I traced the words with my fingertip, feeling a warmth spread through my chest despite the refrigerator's chill. It was as if she had somehow known exactly what I would need to hear today, years after she was gone. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I replaced the book carefully on its shelf. Then I straightened my apron, wiped my face, and reached for the refrigerator door. I had a bakery to run. I emerged from the kitchen with puffy eyes but renewed determination. Grandma Hazel's words echoed in my mind, "The sweetest foundations aren't built on others' approval." I'd been seeking validation from the very people least likely to give it, while ignoring the actual validation happening all around me, customers enjoying my food, the register steadily ringing, the guest book filling with kind words. Casey gave me a concerned look as I approached the counter. "You okay?" "I will be," I answered honestly. "Can you handle the front for 5 more minutes? I need to address something with my family." She nodded, squeezing my arm supportively. I took a moment to wash my face and reapply minimal makeup in the bathroom before returning to the office where my family still sat in awkward silence. "I have something to say," I announced, closing the door behind me. My voice was calm but firm. "This bakery is my business. Not a family project, not a hobby, and certainly not a failure in waiting for you to rescue or replace." Dad started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. For years, I've sought your approval, especially yours, Dad. I followed your advice about getting a business degree. I took the corporate job you wanted for me. I was miserable but successful by your standards." I turned to Brian. "And you've consistently undermined me while pretending to help." "Talking to my landlord? My suppliers? That's not support, that's sabotage." Brian had the decency to look embarrassed. "It wasn't meant to be." "I don't really care how it was meant," I cut him off. "The result is the same. And Mom," I said, turning to her, "I love you, but always trying to smooth things over instead of acknowledging the pattern hasn't helped." I took a deep breath before continuing. "Here's what's going to happen now. You have 2 choices. You can either genuinely support me, which means celebrating my successes and respecting my decisions even when they're different from what you would do, or you can leave. Those are the only options available today." The stunned silence that followed was broken by Dad clearing his throat. "You're being overly emotional about business feedback." "No, I'm setting boundaries in my business." "You've given your feedback. I've heard it. Some of it might even be valid. But this constant expectation of failure stops now." I pulled out my order book and flipped it open. "Would it interest you to know that we've already exceeded my projected first-day sales by 22%? Or that I've secured 3 wholesale accounts with local coffee shops starting next week? Or that the event planner for Westfield Corporate Center inquired about regular large orders for their client meetings?" I laid the book on the table, open to my meticulously tracked sales figures. "This is a real business with real customers and real growth potential. I don't need you to believe in it for it to succeed. I'd like you to, but it's no longer required." Dad stared at the numbers, visibly reassessing. Brian leaned forward to look, his expression shifting from dismissive to surprised. "If you want to discuss actual business strategies based on respect and reality, I'm open to that conversation, another day. But if you're just waiting for me to fail so you can say, 'I told you so,' then please enjoy the rest of the grand opening as customers, not advisors." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, shoulders back and head high. It was the most direct I'd ever been with them, and despite the churning in my stomach, it felt right. Dad and Brian left shortly after, making awkward excuses about other commitments. Mom lingered, clearly torn. "I'm sorry," she said finally. I never realized how much I have undermined you. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. Your grandmother would be so proud of all this. And I am too, really. Thanks, Mom. I wasn't ready to fully forgive, but it was a start. Tell me how I can actually help, she offered. Not interfere, but help. I considered for a moment. We could use an extra pair of hands with the afternoon rush. Nothing complicated, just helping package to-go orders. She lit up, immediately reaching for an apron. For the next 2 hours, Mom worked alongside us, carefully placing cookies in branded boxes and adding our logo stickers to bags. She chatted easily with customers, her natural warmth an asset I hadn't expected. The afternoon brought a second rush of customers, many saying they'd heard about the opening through word of mouth or social media. Several people mentioned seeing Casey's Instagram stories showing behind-the-scenes preparation. At 3 p.m., James Chen, owner of Maple Street Cafe, stopped in. I've been watching your Instagram for months, he admitted. Those croissants look perfect for my breakfast service. Could we discuss a standing order? By 4 p.m., Marcia Davidson from the Westfield Corporate Center returned with her assistant. We ordered a sampling earlier and brought it back to the office. Everyone raved about the quality. We host client meetings every Tuesday and Thursday and need consistent morning pastry service. Could you handle 30 assorted items twice weekly? Each new opportunity validated my business model. These weren't friends being supportive, these were actual clients with genuine demand. By closing time at 6 p.m., I'd scheduled 4 wholesale account meetings for the following week. Casey, Deborah, and Mom helped with closing procedures, wiping down surfaces, reconciling the register, and preparing for tomorrow. We'd sold out of nearly everything, with just a few cookies and cupcakes remaining. What happens to the leftovers? Mom asked as we boxed them up. Stephanie's picking them up for the women's shelter where she volunteers, I explained. Nothing goes to waste. When everything was clean and counted, I gathered my small team in the kitchen. I don't have words for how grateful I am to each of you, I said, emotion catching in my throat. Today exceeded all my expectations, and it wouldn't have been possible without you. We toasted with sparkling cider in paper cups, laughing about the minor disasters and celebrating the successes. The day had been a roller coaster, but standing in my own kitchen surrounded by people who genuinely believed in my vision felt like victory. After everyone left, I sat alone at one of the small tables, reviewing the day's sales and orders. The final tally was almost 40% above my projections. If we could maintain even half this momentum through the week, we'd be on solid footing. My phone buzzed with a text from Marjorie at the Maplewood Weekly. Photos look great. Community response extremely positive. Would love to do follow-up feature in a month or so. Congrats on successful launch. Another text followed from Mom, so proud of you today. Your father needs time to adjust his thinking, but he was impressed by the numbers, even if he won't admit it yet. Love you. I didn't need his approval anymore, but the acknowledgement that reality had begun to shift his perception was satisfying nonetheless. The final text was from Stephanie. The shelter residents loved the treats. Several asked where they came from. You're already making a difference in more ways than one. Call me tomorrow with all the details. As I locked up Sweet Foundations for the first time, I looked back at the space I'd created. Despite the family drama, despite the doubts and obstacles, today had been a success by any measure. More importantly, I'd finally stood up for myself and my vision. Grandma Hazel was right. The sweetest foundations weren't built on others' approval, but on the courage to create something true. Today, I'd found that courage, not just to open a bakery, but to own my place in the world without apology. 1 month after the grand opening, Sweet Foundations Bakery had settled into a sustainable rhythm. The initial surge of curiosity customers had given way to something more valuable, regulars who came in at the same time each day, ordered their favorites, and brought friends. Mr. Henderson arrived at 10:15 every morning for coffee and a cinnamon roll. The teachers from Maplewood Elementary made Friday afternoon trips for survival cookies to celebrate making it through the week. The young mothers group claimed the corner table every Wednesday, ordering lavender cupcakes and discussing board books over baby giggles. The wholesale accounts had grown from the initial 4 inquiries to 7 steady clients. Maple Street Cafe featured our croissants in their breakfast service. Westfield Corporate Center ordered pastry platters twice weekly. 3 local coffee shops carried our cookies, and the boutique hotel on Main Street offered our miniature pastries with their afternoon tea service. My financial projections, once questioned so harshly by Dad and Brian, had proven conservative. We weren't just breaking even, we were showing modest profit in our first month, unheard of in the restaurant industry. The tiny office now displayed framed copies of Marjorie's article from the Maplewood Weekly, which had run with the headline, "Sweet Foundations, Local Baker Rises to Success." The photos showcased our signature items and the warm, welcoming space we'd created. The article mentioned my culinary background and vision for a community-centered bakery, thankfully omitting any mention of family business connections. My relationship with my family had shifted in unexpected ways. Mom had become a regular fixture at the bakery, stopping by several times a week. Sometimes she just visited as a customer, bringing friends to proudly show off my daughter's place. Other times, she rolled up her sleeves and helped during busy periods, her natural warmth making her a hit with customers. "I never realized how much you loved this," she admitted one afternoon as we restocked the display case together. "Seeing you here, in your element, it's like you've been doing this your whole life." "I have been," I reminded her. "Just not professionally until now." Dad had maintained his distance for 2 weeks after the grand opening confrontation. When he finally returned, it was alone, during a quiet Tuesday afternoon lull. He ordered coffee and a chocolate croissant without fanfare, then sat at a corner table reviewing documents from his briefcase. I approached cautiously with a fresh coffee refill. "On the house," I said when he reached for his wallet. He nodded, accepting the peace offering. "Place seems to be doing well." "It is," I confirmed. "Better than projected." He cleared his throat. "Your mother says the wholesale accounts are growing." 7 now, with 2 more in negotiation." A long pause followed before he said, "The cinnamon rolls are good. Better than your grandmother's, actually." "Don't tell your mother I said that." Coming from Dad, this was the equivalent of effusive praise. I bit back a smile. "Your secret's safe with me." Brian remained the most distant, though the active undermining had stopped. Michelle still came in occasionally, ordering complex drinks with multiple substitutions, but even she had moved from quaint to charming in her descriptions to friends on the phone while waiting for her order. More meaningful than family approval was the community we were building. Casey had blossomed from enthusiastic assistant to confident lead baker for the morning shift. Her culinary school instructors now sent students to observe our operations as an example of successful small batch production. Deborah had introduced a seniors discount that brought in a steady stream of retirees during typically slow mid-afternoon hours, creating a lively social scene where neighborhood news was exchanged over tea and shortbread. We'd expanded our hours to meet demand, now opening at 7 a.m. instead of 8 a.m. to catch the commuter crowd. The additional revenue justified hiring 2 more part-time employees, Jackson, a culinary student specializing in bread, and Mia, a former corporate accountant who wanted more meaningful work. The team functioned like a family, the supportive kind I'd always wished for. The kitchen now featured a dedicated shelf for Grandma Hazel's recipes, with her photo watching over our work. I'd framed her note about the sweetest foundations and hung it where I could see it during challenging moments. On quiet evenings after closing, I often sat alone at one of the small tables with a cup of tea and a fresh pastry, simply absorbing the reality of what I'd created. The space felt alive even when empty, holding the day's conversations and laughter. The worn wooden floors and tin ceiling had witnessed hundreds of moments of connection, friends reuniting, business deals closed, first dates, and family celebrations. Sweet Foundations was becoming exactly what I'd envisioned, not just a bakery, but a cornerstone of community. The most profound change wasn't in the business but in myself. Standing up to my family had rippled through other areas of my life, giving me confidence to trust my instincts. When a supplier tried to increase prices without notice, I negotiated firmly instead of accepting it to avoid conflict. When a particularly demanding customer regularly made the staff uncomfortable with his rudeness, I had a direct conversation about our expectations for mutual respect. I'd stopped seeking validation from sources unlikely to provide it and instead recognized it in daily interactions: the smile when someone bit into a perfect pastry, the celebration cakes ordered for significant milestones, the thank you notes from the women's shelter where we donated daily leftovers. One evening, a month after opening, Stephanie and I celebrated with champagne after closing. She'd been my unwavering support throughout the journey, painting walls at midnight and believing in my vision when family didn't. "Remember when you were afraid to tell your dad you were quitting corporate?" she asked, clinking glasses with me. "Look at you now, bakery owner extraordinaire." "I still can't believe it sometimes," I admitted. "That all this is real. That it's mine." "Believe it," she said firmly. "You built this, Audrey. Against all doubts, including your own." That night, I updated the small chalkboard sign that stood by the register with a new quote: "The courage to create begins with a single step." Below it, I added, "Thank you for being part of our foundation." The journey to Sweet Foundations Bakery had been far from smooth. There would still be challenges ahead: equipment failures, seasonal fluctuations, staff changes. The business would evolve, requiring continuous adaptation and growth. My family relationships would remain complex, with old patterns resurfacing alongside new understanding. But standing in the bakery I'd created through determination and passion, I finally understood Grandma Hazel's wisdom completely. The sweetest foundations weren't just about courage to begin, they were about the courage to continue building something true to yourself, one day at a time, regardless of who understood or approved. The next morning, as I turned the key in the lock at 6 a.m. and breathed in the potential of a new day, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was where I belonged, doing what I loved. The dough needed shaping, the ovens needed preheating, and soon the cases would fill with fresh creations that would become part of other people's stories. This was success, not measured in profit margins alone, though those were healthy, but in the alignment between my inner values and outer work. In the relationships formed over shared food. In the courage to build foundations sweet enough to sustain not just a business, but a meaningful life. Have you ever had to stand up for your dreams when others doubted you? Or found yourself creating something meaningful despite discouragement? I'd love to hear your stories of courage in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe to join me for more real conversations about following your passion. Remember, sometimes the sweetest success comes after the most difficult challenges. Thank you for being part of my story today. I'm grateful for each of you.